Benfield home here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from Santa Fe, New Mexico, where last night hundreds of people crowded into the historic Lensic Theater for an evening sponsored by the Lannan Foundation, a speech by Tim Flannery. Tim Fritjof Flannery, to be exact. Fritjof, named for, well, a distant relative, a Norwegian explorer, Fridtjof Nansen, who was an explorer, a diplomat, won the 1922 Nobel Peace Prize. A relative of yours, Tim Flannery.
I suppose we haven't been able to trace back how, but apparently he is, yeah.
Chip off the old block. What is it like to discover a species? Talk about one of the most remarkable ones that you did discover.
Well, it's a very humbling experience, and if I could just say that I'm more like the person who presents the species to the world, because often the local people where I work, the indigenous people, have known about these animals for some time. But one of the most extraordinary discoveries really was of a tree kangaroo. Now, I know people don't think about kangaroos hopping around in the treetops of the tropical rainforest, but they do. There's 17 species of them. And in 1995, I discovered one species of tree kangaroo that had come down from the treetops and lived in the alpine meadows under the glaciers of the highest mountains in our region in West Papua. And that animal was about the size of a Labrador dog and looked like a little panda, black and white, gorgeous animal, and was really tame. It didn't have any fear of people because there was no people in its habitat. And that was an amazingly humbling moment to think that, you know, I'm the first outsider to see this creature. It was just fantastic.
As you talk about indigenous people, the indigenous people you work with, in your book, Throwaway Leg, Adventures in the Jungles of New Guinea, what does throwaway leg mean?
It means hit the road. You know, Papua New Guineans walk everywhere because there is no roads through most of the country. So when they're going, after a meeting, they say, me by throwaway leg now, it means I'm going to hit the road. I'll see you later.
Will you dedicate the book to Jim Bob Moffat, his successors, and all the other CEOs of mining companies with interests in Melanesia, in the hope that through reading it, they'll understand a little better the people whose lives they've so profoundly changed? Explain Jim Bob Moffat's company, Freeport-McMoRan.
Well, Freeport-McMoRan runs the world's largest copper mine.
It's based here in the United States.
It is based in New Orleans, and the mine itself, though, is in West Papua, and it's in a very remote region that has dense populations of people who are really still living pretty much a Stone Age existence. And, of course, that mine just has had enormous impacts. One of the most profound impacts is that the agreement to operate in that area was forged under the Suharto government, and it involved a fairly significant military presence.
The dictator of Indonesia.
That's right, yeah. So the mine has acted as a focal point for those for military officers to come in and then really suppress those local people. Indonesia sees West Papua as its sort of wild frontier, and the sort of things that happened here on the frontier in the 1850s are now going on in West Papua. Displacement and murders of indigenous people, the theft of resources, really an attempt to take that wealth for others. Now, things have got better, very much better, under the recent president, but there are still significant abuses going on in that area, perpetrated by the military.
One of the controversial proposals you've put forward is using models of indigenous people in Australia, how they dealt with the environment today. You're a fierce critic of coal mining.
Yes, I am. I think coal brings many problems with it. It's not just the global warming, although that's probably the most significant. The reason that we can't eat fish, or pregnant women shouldn't eat fish too often, is that the mercury that's got into the fish, the food chain of fish in the oceans. Most of that mercury comes from burning coal. People don't realise. Cadmium poisoning from burning coal. The sulphur problems we've got from burning coal.
Mercury in the fish from burning coal?
Yeah, that's where it comes from. The mercury gets up into this wonderful atmosphere of ours and is dispersed across the planet within a few weeks, and some of that mercury falls to the oceans where it is oxidated, and then it tends to preferentially build up in living things. So by the time we eat tuna, it's full of the mercury that has come from the smokestacks of our coal-fired power plants.
Talk about geothermia and the hot rocks.
Well, look, it is so important that we get this new industrial revolution happening and move from the dirty fossil fuels to clean sources of energy. One of the most promising is geothermal energy. It's an old source, really. We've had some geothermal plants around the world for a long time, but recently there's been astonishing discoveries of massive reserves of heat energy in the Earth's crust. One of them, the biggest, is in Australia, and I've proposed to our government that we try to exploit this clean and sustainable energy resource to run a lot of our heavy industrial needs, such as mineral processing. We could have a new city in Central Australia that I've sort of called geothermia, based around the use of this resource, and use our national rail system to bring in minerals to be cleanly processed and then shipped out.
Now, explain how this was discovered, where it is in the Earth.
Look, it's in the most dismal spot in Australia. It's right in the dead centre of our continent, near Lake Eyre, which is a huge salt pan. And it's 4 kilometres down in the Earth, and it was discovered by an oil and gas company who had discovered a ring of oil-bearing rocks and then a ring of gas-bearing rocks, and in the middle this really hot rocks. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars drilling, and being an oil and gas company, they thought, oh, we like the oil, we like the gas, but these hot rocks, we can just post that information publicly. And of course someone else came up and said, well, the amount of energy in the hot rocks is actually probably 100 times greater than the energy in the oil and gas they discovered. So this is the real gem. And so they got a free ride. They got a couple of $100 million worth of free drilling, and now they're going out trying to exploit this resource, and we'll know by Christmas, I think, whether this can be successfully done. The second drill bit is now deep in the earth. It's getting close to those hot rocks, and if we can get circulation happening of the hot fluids as projected, then we will have unlocked an enormous energy resource at about the price of coal, and that will change everything for Australia.
And how long would it last?
If you run the whole Australian economy on it, it'll last at least a century, and that's the one deposit. There's 10 companies looking for more of these hot rocks in Australia now, and in China there's great prospects as well. There's prospects in Europe, and doubtless in parts of the US. So as we shift away from coal and take a medium to long-term view, we can't just imagine the choices between clean coal technologies and nuclear power. There are other very formidable sources of power that can deliver large volumes of what's called baseload electricity, the stuff you need 24 hours a day at low cost.
Let's talk about your proposals around green electrical grid, green transportation.
Yeah, look, we know that in order to beat this problem, we have to reduce our emissions on the order of 80% in the next 40 years. Now, 40 years might sound like it's a long way off, but it isn't really, And I suppose just to drive home to people what that means, it means that in 40 years from now, we can't be driving cars that are fueled with fossil fuels, with oil. We can't be generating our electricity by burning coal and natural gas. We have to have shifted decisively from those polluting sources of power to clean sources of power. So that's why the race is on now for the new photovoltaics, to harness the energy of the sun, which is massive, to harness wind energy, wave energy, geothermal energy, all of these sources that will drive this new, clean and prosperous economy of ours, if we can reach out, make the investments and push forward to avoid dangerous climate change.
Tim Flannery, can you talk about air conditioning?
Well, air conditioning is a very strange thing. Of course, as our Earth warms, it's becoming more and more necessary for older people and especially young people who are vulnerable to heat waves and so forth. But it also, at the moment, relies on the burning of fossil fuel, and of course it is the great driver of demand. So industry is rubbing its hands together at the moment saying, oh, let's build a few more coal-fired power plants so we can supply the demand. And of course that's just worsening the problem of the warming. So it's a very vicious feedback loop. The more we air condition, if we do it using traditional energy sources, the worse the problem gets. So it's a zero-sum game. And we have to break out of that sort of thinking and see the whole picture, see the bigger picture, and start working really as a species to try to regulate the burden of gases in our atmosphere for the good of all. And that's going to be the great enterprise of this century of ours, this 21st century, is taking that bigger view.
When you talk about wind and solar, you're not talking just about a technical solution. This is a serious challenge to large, consolidated corporations, because inherent in them is a more decentralized approach, a cooperative approach. Can you explain that?
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, electricity is a generic product, and I can generate some now by rubbing my backside on this seat, static electricity. We can all do it, and once you realise that, and you can think, oh, I'll put some solar panels on the house, you're getting rid of your power bill, and that means that the company's not getting those payments that they love every 3 months into the future. We can take control of our own future.